Welcome to Beyond the Veil, where we tell you the story of how a Valentine Wolf song becomes a Valentine Wolf song. On this week's episode, we're going to be talking about track one, I Felt a Funeral, off our new album, Only Gossamer My Gown. And as you can probably surmise by me saying on this week's episode, we are going to be doing more of these, and I'm going to be taking you eventually track by track through this entire record because we really think this is the best thing we've ever done. So, the story of I Felt a Funeral, which went from a song that I did not like, that eventually I was thinking would not be on the album at all, to the song that is our set opener and has been for well over a year. When we can start playing live shows again, as of this taping, it's January 2021. We are still in the COVID-19 era. We've not been able to play this song live for you yet, but we can't wait till we can again. So here's how this song came to be, and really the entire Emily Dickinson project. So, December of 2018, we had just come out with The Haunting of Mary Shelley, and we had been doing, we were doing a program at Hughes Main Library in downtown Greenville, which is really one of our favorite places to play in Greenville. It's really cool what they do there, and they let us do some really awesome events there. And we were doing one of the Christmas Ghost Story programs, and we were talking to our good friend Mary Frances, and she mentioned that the library was going to apply for a grant, Rhythms and Rhymes, combining music and poetry. And she said, hey, you know, we thought of you guys. Do you have any poetry projects coming up? And a few months before, we had just sort of casually thought, well, maybe we could do Emily Dickinson. We kind of, on a very surface level, way less than we wound up learning when we did the record, knew that Emily Dickinson did have a gothic, almost macabre sensibility. A lot of grief and mourning were themes that she explored in her poetries, and in my view, as I've talked about, people tend to gloss over that. And we were just on a nice long walk. That's how a lot of our process happens. Sarah and I take long walks together through forests. There's a lot of nature preserves we like to hang out in, and a lot of what we do, a lot of the planning about what happens at Valentine Wolf happens on those walks. And we were just talking about, well, what do we do after exploring Mary Shelley? And Emily Dickinson came up, and we just said, well, we were thinking maybe Emily Dickinson. And the library was super receptive to this idea, so we thought, okay, that would be cool. And then they said, well, could you have something ready by April? So that was 4 months away, and Sarah, my wife and my bandmate, being who she is like, a whole hour worth of songs, 4 months, not a problem. She writes ridiculously quickly. And it's awesome to kind of watch it unfold. Usually the process is, and this is almost how every Valentine Wolf song sort of comes about. I think we're going to be maybe tweaking this formula in the future just to challenge ourselves. But for now, generally Sarah writes the vocal parts and an accompanying piano part first. And then I come in and I make decisions regarding drum grooves, arrangements. Oh, this section's cool, maybe we'll repeat that more. And I'll add all the metal parts to it, and then we get kind of a rough demo. And I think that one of the things that I've noticed over the years, I was like, well, the cool thing about that is we get a song pretty quick, but I really like to play things. And if you've seen our Seance series or any of the solo bass things, you know I love to improvise. Improvisation is something that's very important to me as a bass player, and invariably what happens, and I'm kind of trying to think of a good example right off. Usually we will write and record a song, and then we'll play it live, and I'll come up with different things, a little turn here, a twist here. Maybe the best example is if you can find some live versions of Annabelle. There's a couple on our channel. It's radically different from what I play on the record. So my suggestion was, hey, let's write this really fast and play through all these songs before we commit it to the CD. And Sarah's like, hey, yeah, no problem. The interesting thing was that I think of all the songs we played that very first night in April, very few of those songs actually made it onto Only Gossamer My Gown. It was a really cool experience of, we got to play all these songs first, and the ones that did changed, they underwent quite a bit of metamorphosis, and none more so than I Felt a Funeral. As I alluded to, when we played it live, I didn't like it. I didn't have fun playing it. I don't know if like the audience, they were just like, yeah, for sure, fine, whatever. I don't really know what it was, but immediately after that first performance, I was like, okay, so I Felt a Funeral's on the chopping block. One of my challenges, and I've written about this in other places, is I think you all know, and if you don't, you're about to, is that like a lot of creatives, a lot of people, a lot of everybody who's going through the year we just all went through, right? You know, I have depression. That's something I, you know, have to deal with every day. I have to figure out how am I going to be a creator and deal with my mental health issues. And it's not easy for anybody. For me, the big challenge is that I was joking with Sarah earlier and said, I don't think I've been able to trust my intuition for about 15 years or something like that. It feels very weird for me whenever I create with depression because I tend to think, okay, none of it's good. And one of her roles in the band is really kind of talking me out. Another kind of, you know, behind the scenes joke is if you've seen the show Metalocalypse, there's this one scene where they're listening back and Nathan Explosion cracks his knuckles and then deletes everything we do. And we're like, that's totally me. So she told me, no, stick with it. I Felt a Funeral is a great song. It's one of my favorite songs. You just haven't figured out kind of what it needs to be yet. And turned out she's 100% right. So the first thing was when we put it together, the original form of it, and I really wish I could play you some of it, but can't, don't have any archival audio, was one of the things in our process is when she gets finished with writing her material and I put, you know, the metal wrist to it, I really pay close attention to what songs this reminds me of. It's a way of like really honoring the inspiration, you know. And the song I Felt a Funeral really reminded me of the one thing that kept coming back to my mind was Wasted Years by Iron Maiden. So my idea was, hey, let's just take Wasted Years apart, figure out how Iron Maiden kind of put that together. That'll give me some ideas about how to put I Felt a Funeral together. And it didn't really work. Especially the opening and the intro, there's that sort of ethereal synthesizer element, and then there's this harpsichord part, and I always try to do this start-stop rhythm thing. If you listen to Wasted Years, you'll hear instantly what I'm talking about. And I don't know when or at what point we changed it to the ethereal synth sound, and then there's the drum fill, and then everything just bam, it just starts and it just sort of grabs you by the throat. And when we put that together in rehearsal, I was like, I remember thinking we're going to start opening our sets. I remember asking Sarah, I was like, does this feel good enough to sing? Can you start with this? And because I really wanted everybody to have that. In my imagination, I always see the lights going down and that kind of ghostly sound starting, and then everything just sort of explodes, you know. And she said, yeah, absolutely. And I knew it would, if it wasn't going to be the first song on the album, it was going to be the second song on the album. It was going to open really quickly. So it was a little bit of revision. So one of the awesome things about our writing partnership is working with somebody I trust to give me really good feedback and tell me when it's time to, okay, no. Because usually if I don't like something, if I've gone through the process, if I've gone through the cycle of adding to it, and I tell her, hey, I'm not into the song, her general response is, well, I'll write 3 more by tomorrow and we can pick something else. So that's how we've sort of learned to work together over the years. And I think that the 2 last things about this song that I find really, really interesting, that the things that I'm still very proud about when I hear it, are the solo section, which that was a very intentional part where one of the things we challenged ourselves for on Only Gossamer in My Gown was, instead of doing the florid, sort of improvised, flowing solo break, I wanted to write instrumental interludes, really sort of episodic, an instrumental section, very much influenced by Randy Rhoads and neoclassical metal, especially some of the solo breaks he did, that became kind of like these own little mini compositions. I was like, well, maybe let's do something like that. So the solo is sort of a variation on the introduction material, and then when I repeated it, that's very much my love of Baroque music coming through and sort of doing some tricks with the bow to kind of double up the intensity a little bit, and it's still one of my favorite solos we've ever done. And usually when I start writing solos like that, Sarah tends to respond very positively, so I'm really excited about that. The other thing about I Felt a Funeral that I find really fascinating was that one was the song where I noticed we started ending our songs in not the tonic. And what that really briefly means in music theory terms, I'm going to super oversimplify this. If you're super into music theory, you can kind of zone out because this is going to be basic. When we're talking about what they call common practice music theory, you know, Johann Sebastian Bach, we're talking about just the kind of theory you start learning as a music major. You always end the song in the tonic. When we say tonic just means the key or the one chord, when you say, you know, this piece is in D major, the song is in D major. Well, D major is the tonic. It's the central, if you want to think of it like a color, it's the main color in your color palette. So, and that's just sort of one of the unspoken rules. You don't end on any other note other than the tonic chord. That's how everything ends. I Felt a Funeral actually ends on the dominant chord, which is the next most important chord. If we're speaking of functional music theory and functional harmony. And the dominant chords, it basically what it does is it's the height of tension, and it always resolves to the one chord. This is what you get beaten into your skull when you're a freshman music theory student. You know, dominant chords always resolve, maybe sometimes 6. I said this is grossly oversimplified. We'll get into theory another time. But 5 chords go to the one chord, especially if it's the end of the song. Our I Felt a Funeral is in G minor, and it ends very much on D. And it took me a while to kind of figure out why that felt good. And all I can think of and all I can say is emotionally, I really feel like ending pieces with this sort of open and uncertainty note is really a very powerful way of portraying grief and unresolved emotions in music. And it just always feels right, even though it shouldn't work at all. I said this was the last thing, but the one other thing that that I'm really proud of with this song is, and we'll talk about this more as I go through Only Gossamer Art My Gown, turning Emily Dickinson's poems into song lyrics is something that it was very cool. And I think, you know, Sarah finding a chorus out of the words of I Felt a Funeral, all the words on the album are 100% belonging to Emily Dickinson, but kind of rearranging them and making songs out of them. It just, at no point while we were recording the record did I ever think, hey, these words don't make sense or the setting doesn't work and all that stuff. And setting lyrics and making the poetry work, that's a whole other skill. So, hope you enjoyed this look into how I Felt a Funeral became I Felt a Funeral, how it went from almost not making the album to the song we open our shows with. And we are going to be back very soon, and if it's not another Beyond the Veil, it'll definitely be some music for you or something else like that. So thanks for watching. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. If you love this Valentine Wolf t-shirt I'm wearing, you can get that and other designs over on valentinewolf.com. That's almost all the commercials I'm going to do, but at the end of this, we're going to thank all of those people on Patreon. They're the ones who make these videos possible. So, but you also make it possible for watching. Thank you so much, and join us again where we go beyond the veil to check out the Soul Selects Her Own Society. We'll see you then.